get started. My name is Craig Douglas, and I'm here with the Provider Alliance for our annual meeting. We appreciate everybody taking the time to join us this morning. We have a packed agenda, so I'm just going to get us kicked off with a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording the session today, so if for any reason you need to leave the meeting, just let us know. You can send a message to information@provideralliance.org, and we'll make sure to provide you a link to the meeting. And as usual, we'll follow up with links to the recording and all the attachments that we provide during the session today. We are going to use the chat and the Q&A function. So chat is enabled for everyone, and the Q&A function is also there if anybody has any questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Craig. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I just want to call out very briefly, we're going to post our meeting minutes from last year's annual meeting to the chat. I've been struggling with some Outlook issues, so I'm going to challenge Craig here today, hopefully not too much, to get things put out there. Wanted to give you a little bit of advance notice. They're not lengthy minutes, but we just like to do this according to protocol. So Craig will get those minutes posted into the chat. And I just want to quickly introduce our board president, Ruth Siegfried. I want to make a couple of comments. Recently, Envision announced leadership changes. Ruth has been the founder, president of Envision Human Services for a very long time. She's also been involved in the history of the Provider Alliance, really since before its inception. And I really appreciate Ruth's support, leadership, dedication to the Provider Alliance. We're going to put the press release into the chat as well for those of you who may not be aware. And I've encouraged Ruth to sort of talk to us, make some comments today. Ruth is still going to be around, fortunately, so she's still going to serve out this next term on our board and be involved in our transition. And Kim Love has been CEO for Envision Human Services here. She will assume the presidency, as you'll note in the press release. So we also want to take a moment to congratulate Kim and to certainly thank and congratulate Ruth for the next phase of what she will be doing. So without any further delay, Ruth, thank you for being here today, and I'll let you open up our annual meeting.
All right. Always the formalities first. So the first thing that we need to do today is call the meeting to order and ensure that we have a quorum. And Patrick, do we have any concerns with having a quorum today?
I do not. Again, one of the things we'd hope to do is get those minutes pushed out and encourage everybody to log in. Based on registrations, I'll declare a quorum. We'll watch for registrations as people enter the room. But I'm confident and comfortable saying that we've had a quorum from people who have registered to attend today. And I will leave it at that, Ruth, and certainly continue to monitor things as people enter the room.
All right, very good. Thanks, Patrick. So we always conduct our meetings, or have for many years, using modern rules of order. And if you're not familiar with those, it just simply allows us to use a more informal approach to conducting a meeting than the Robert's Rules of Order do. So when we have something that's kind of routine, we look for a present the issue and then look for any objections. And if there are none, then we don't bother to take a vote. We just note that there were no objections. When it comes to the more formal things, like our election of our board class this year, we will revert to Robert's Rules of Order and actually take a vote. So you're going to experience an electronic polling system today when we get to that part of the meeting. So first, let's move on to presentation of the annual meeting minutes from June 30th of 2023. Those are the minutes that are in the chat, and hopefully you have a chance to glance through those. They're fairly simple. And as you can see from this year's agenda, our meeting is fairly brief as it relates to the actual business meeting section, and we'll move on then after we adjourn to the really interesting stuff that Patrick's going to be presenting to you today, and I think Will's going to join in on. So I see that we have a motion to approve the minutes, and if there are no objections, the minutes will be approved for June 30th of 2023. I'm just checking the chat to make sure. that there are no objections. Okay. Thanks. All right, so Patrick has asked me to take a few minutes and provide my own perspective. And so I thought I would take you back to the early 90s when the Provider Alliance originated. And that was a result of a frustration of a few providers, well, probably a frustration of a lot of providers, but a frustration that a few of us felt was representative of many others. And that was that counties were not paying attention to providers. The counties felt that, or acted as though they were sort of the dictators, and that providers were agents of the counties as opposed to separate entities with our own leadership and our own strategic plans. And four of us got together and decided that we were going to start a formal organization to represent ourselves. And it was very interesting because that really shook up a few people and showed us that acting collaboratively and collectively could really make a difference in how the government and our funders saw us and how they treated us. So we really noted that right away. And we kind of worked together for a few years, but rather quietly. And it was just our presence that caused people from the counties in particular to be a little bit more concerned with what we were doing. A little bit of a first part of our history that probably most people don't really know about. So along came Ed Piccarini a few years later, and he launched a really interesting new effort where he called together anybody that wanted to attend a meeting and talked about a new effort to collaborate and share resources across, especially Western Pennsylvania, but Central Pennsylvania as well, because all of us kind of felt like things were happening out in the East, but we had very few opportunities to get together ourselves and really talk about what our concerns were. Shortly after that, the Provider Alliance group adopted as a nonprofit, which had been adopted as a nonprofit organization, met with Ed and offered up the organization for the achievement of Ed's vision. So we had supported Ed by giving him the Provider Alliance as an organization. And then Ed took us on, the three of the founding members, as his board of directors. And that's how we proceeded for quite a few years as Ed really developed the beginnings of the Provider Alliance and built a group that was quite substantial and had a lot of voices. Ed passed the torch then to Patrick D'Amico along the way, as many of you have figured out by now. And Patrick expanded the board of directors as well as the initiatives of the Provider Alliance. And that really kind of takes me to where we are today. I think my highlights on the Provider Alliance in recent years, and there are so many other achievements, but the things that I think are most notable are our government and advocacy efforts. For a couple of years, we focused really heavily on op-eds and editorials and gained so much traction in the discussions around the issues facing our service system. And I saw that as primarily a Provider Alliance effort and a Provider Alliance achievement. A couple of years ago then, through discussions with Patrick, we decided that we had had so much really good effort and impact by the editorials and the op-eds, particularly around some editorials and letters to the editors that a number of CEOs signed. The first one, I think, was maybe 17 or 18 CEOs signed a letter to the editors that got published all over the state. later, we had another letter that was signed by over 100 people, and all service providers and advocacy organizations around the state of Pennsylvania. And that was a huge achievement, something that had never happened in the 40 some years I've been in Pennsylvania, where groups got together and took a stand and pushed an issue so much that newspapers picked it up, and news media all over the state picked up the effort and published it. We had hundreds of editorials and op-eds published during those couple of years, and we really did start to get some traction. And that traction has expanded into the government and advocacy efforts that the Provider Alliance has incorporated over the past year, which really grew into, I should stop and say that that collaboration with all the editorials and letters to the editors, we kind of expanded that through some work Patrick and I did to bring together a huge number of people that expressed interest in getting together and talking about what next steps might be. So I think there were 60 or 70 people who showed interest in meeting together and talking about how we move forward with our government and advocacy efforts after those editorials and letters had been so widely received. Out of that meeting came the IDA Associations group, which you all are aware of now because Patrick and others talk about this at every single Provider Alliance meeting. To me, this is one of the most impactful efforts that the Provider Alliance has ever contributed to. And I have to say that I am so proud of the organization that the Provider Alliance has become. In my estimation, it's really the leader of the IDD or IDA providers in Pennsylvania. That IDA Associations group composed of the Provider Alliance, PAR, the ARC of Pennsylvania, RCPA, MAX, the Alliance of Community Service Providers, that group has really held together now for well over a year. And that's what has been instrumental in getting the meetings with the governor, the follow-ups with the governor's office, with legislators, with the budget proposal that's on the table, and even with the index bill that is out there in sight, and that everyone is still working so hard to make a reality. So I am super proud of what the Provider Alliance has done and what it continues to do. And that's really an effort of all of you. Yes, Patrick leads the way, and we all support him, but it is our members who really make it happen, and especially that Government and Advocacy Committee, which now is chaired by my good friend Nancy Murray, and that it is just a pretty incredible group making some really incredible things happen. So as Patrick said, I'm going to step away later this year at the end of the year from my leadership role at Envision. And I get to hand the organization off to someone that many of you probably know, but of course I know very well, Kim Love. She's had numerous leadership positions at Envision during the decades we've worked together, and I feel very, very confident in handing the organization over to her. We have shared the same vision for serving people with complex needs over several decades already, and I know that she will continue to be involved in the Provider Alliance as well, as many of our staff are as well. You may also already know that I'll be continuing to work on your behalf, on behalf of your organizations and on behalf of the people we support, with my major efforts being around advocacy, government relations, and through the development of William Penn Human Services Organization. I see William Penn as a long-term initiative that will ensure that the citizens of Pennsylvania who have experienced IDA, intellectual disability and autism, will be that the initiative will provide a more flexible and responsive set of services that really can be sustainable for future decades. So I'm going to be very excited to speak with all of you more about William Penn in months and the next couple of years. So as I transition away from leadership at Envision, the Provider Alliance has another opportunity to expand our board. So I encourage all of you to provide Patrick with recommendations to add new members to our board of directors. We want to ensure a wide range of experiences that enrich our representation of our members. And this is a great opportunity to do so, as we've expanded this board several times already and intend to continue to do so. So this is a perfect opportunity for you to start thinking about who you want to include in representation of our membership over the next years. So I'll conclude with thanking all of you, because none of this could happen without all of you in your membership and your participation, making this organization of the Provider Alliance surpass the visions of those who started the Provider Alliance, as well as the first 30 some odd people that met with Ed when he offered a forum for discussion. And as I mentioned, this group has really led the way to this historic budget that's not yet passed, so don't quit pushing yet, but we are oh so close. And I firmly believe that without the Provider Alliance, this never would have happened. So thank you, Patrick, for the opportunity to have a little reflection and to talk with all of you as the members in my sort of transition days. But let's move on now to the business of our election. This is the last time my name will be on the order of the board class, at least as the role of president. But I'm alongside a great group of leaders that I think will continue the never-ending work of this Provider Alliance. And so you see the board class in front of you at present. No major changes this year. We're trying to stay the course in preparation for transitions and additions to the board next year. And Patrick, how are we proceeding with the vote on? First, we need a motion to approve the board class and renew the 4-year term for Will Stennett. So I'll entertain through the chat any motions.
You can raise a hand or just enter any voting member, any provider member is eligible to really make a motion.
Thank you, Walter. Appreciate
We
that.
We can also then, Craig can open a poll. We can allow you to just cast your vote.
Yeah, let's get a second for the motion and then do we have a second for Walter's motion, please? Thank you, Tiffany. All right, and in the chat, you should see the poll. So if you would just choose a response, yes or no, to the poll, would appreciate that. And then, Craig, you can report the results of the poll.
It's like we're at 99%, 98% in agreement.
All done. All votes being cast, the motion carries. And I appreciate that, because without our board, we are not as strong as an organization as we are together. As with all things that the Provider Alliance does, it is all of us working together that makes everything happen. So thank you very much. And next order of business is to ask if anyone has anything else to add to the meeting. Any other comments, questions, or concerns that you want to raise? Hearing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Patrick, that's a pretty good gavel. We have a quick motion to adjourn from Roland. Thank you very much. And given the motion, I love the chat. Thank you, Lindsay. And I see Sue's message there. So do check the chat so you can see what people are saying. And the annual meeting for 2024 is in fact adjourned, and we will move on to the rest of the Provider Alliance agenda. Thank you,
Thank
Patrick.
you very much, Ruth. Appreciate your comments. Certainly want to just acknowledge the work of the board as you have and the work of members, really, as you say. And I think everything on kind of the precipice of where we are today in terms of budget, it's really been a joint effort, certainly by associations and stakeholder groups, but really by individual members who make this work. And I think the leadership of holding associations like TPA accountable to make sure we work together and get these kind of results. So Ruth, I thank you, wish you the best. We will move on here to the next part of our agenda. So thank you everyone for being here today. I want to review a couple of things. If we can go to next slide, there was a lot of activity this week. So as we sort of set up the next segment on our agenda and talk about advocacy and the state of the budget, on Tuesday, there was a Post-Gazette editorial as you see on screen. We'll drop that into the chat for you for the full article. This is obviously a support of the disability community. I want to, again, sort of praise the Post-Gazette for how they have weighed in on behalf of intellectual disability and autism issues across the state. So this is another great article. And as you read, it's really more about sustainability, and it's really specifically about an annual market index when you really look at the details of the editorial. So we appreciate the support of the PG. Again, our committee and our members at large continuing to reach out to media, legislators. So another great development. And the very next day, Tuesday, or Wednesday rather, on the next day that after this had been published, we had the joint press release or press conference at the Capitol. So if you can go next slide, Craig, we just want to kind of show some photos. This is just, it was a great day of self-advocates, family members, DSPs, and as you see on the top left, those are the co-chairs of the House Human Services Committee. Doyle Heffley, Stephen Kinsey, Republican, Democrat. We have some clips. We'll get some things posted to sort of memorialize this. A press release went out. This was a joint effort of all the associations. And we really wanted to stand back and just let the people most affected by the system and by this proposed investment speak for themselves. And it was really a great day. The two gentlemen you see who lead the Human Services Committee both spoke with equal support, indicated their commitment to continue to work together. So to get legislators really in leadership positions, a bipartisan message from them directly. It was just really a strong day. You see several folks and many other speakers that really carried the day. So we were very proud of the efforts of everyone and the people who took the time to be there and capture this. On the next slide, we just want to kind of show you again the sponsors of this, and this continues to be the group of IDA associations who have worked together that Ruth mentioned by name. This has really been a piece of collateral we've used for months now, just asking people to share this with legislators, share this with your stakeholders and your board members. So the work of approving the budget, as we're going to talk here in a moment, is really, of course, not over. We have some news to report. So just I think this morning, maybe yesterday, if you can go to next slide, Craig, there's another article that we'll post into the chat. Pennsylvania to begin new fiscal year without budget, as Shapiro lawmakers express optimism. So you can read that article as well. We have a quote here on screen, Senate Majority Leader Joe Pittman, who we have met with, who had a meeting with Sandy Schaefer and her daughter Kate, that I know was very influential on Senator Pittman. And he has expressed his personal support of the issues. We know this is a bipartisan issue. We encourage you to read the entirety of the article. And we're fortunate enough now to have David Caligiuri from C&G Strategies come in. David, I want to welcome you. I know the whole reason we wanted you to come here today was sort of talk about exactly what's on screen now. So we can go to next slide, Craig, and kind of talk through what's on the agenda. David, welcome, and I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you. Yeah, I was hoping that I could tell everyone that, they're really close to getting a budget finalized by the constitutional deadline of June 30th. But as you can see, we're going to miss that mark. And, as troubling as that may sound, this is unfortunately a normal course of business for our legislature. We tend to miss that June 30th deadline quite often. And this year's no different. I will say that although we are missing that deadline, and by those articles, if you want to read those when you get a chance, you'll see that the legislature is working all weekend. Well, I take that back. Their staff is working all weekend and leadership is working all weekend to try to come up with a number for everybody to agree upon. Right now, the Senate has adjourned until probably Monday. The House is going to adjourn this afternoon, also probably Monday or Tuesday, which means they'll most likely work through the July 4th holiday to get the budget done. So, yet again, we find ourselves in this position without a budget and not hitting the mark of our constitutionally imposed deadline of June 30th.
So David, anything further on what you're hearing as far as, I think you've really framed, we're getting as much information. I know you are directly reporting back to us, on the intelligence inside the Capitol. So taking a break, coming back Monday, some optimism expressed in the article that we've shared. Any other insights? It really feels like, even in the article, we're really not mentioned, which I have to say is a good thing. It talks about the top line number is big. There's a surplus that's sort of being debated over. The sense I think we all have is that we're in pretty good shape. That doesn't mean it's a guarantee. We want to still encourage everybody and make sure people are aware it's not done until it's done. But any other insights from people you've heard about, or talked about, and what might occur? Because we also tend to hear it's not going to get passed at that top line number. Right. So do you think, could that could that delay in any way the fact that it's probably needs to change? Even if it doesn't affect us, it could affect the timing, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. The timing is an issue. So there are two things that you have to look at when the legislature debates this budget, is that there is a general authorization, general appropriation that they'll vote on. And that basically just keeps the lights on. Then there's a fiscal code, and the fiscal code is where the spend is, right? Where where we are, right? Where you find a lot of the departments and their spending allotment. What we think may happen is that the legislature will vote next week on a general appropriation, just so they can keep the lights on and keep paying employees. But where we stand with the general spend, we're not sure yet. We're not sure if they're going to push that off into the fall and keep negotiating. It goes back and forth. That's what I heard yesterday. This morning, that can change. It moves that fast. But I do want to just impress upon something that Ruth mentioned. And, all the work that Patrick and TPA and the folks on this call have done over the course of the last year is remarkable. If we remember last year, not only were we left out of the budget, we were cut. Well, this year, we had folks who went and met with the governor and really, I think, impressed upon him the need for increased spending. And, earlier this year, the governor went on tour touting the need for historic investments in the IDA community. And I think that was a direct result of the advocacy efforts of everyone on this call and the families. And it really touched his heart. And I think it's made a difference. And so I think we need to remember that and continue doing that. Today, this weekend, right up until we do get a budget. So if you have any connections, if you're friends with any legislators, just continue to press upon him the importance of this budget and what it means to the IDA community.
Yeah, David, thank you. I want to kind of move into the advocacy. You sort of led us into that. But I want to clarify then one thing. So if we hear and read in the paper the general appropriations gets passed and the lights remain on, that's not the passage of the budget. That's not the initiative that increases rates. And that's not anything actionable that we're going to expect that rate increases can then be published, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good to know, because there's a lot of news on the budget, and gets into general press, of course, and we'll keep members informed as we go into this. July 4th week. And I know David will keep us surprised as we get a daily update from your firm, which is appreciated. And we know you're working hard.
We'll
on
continue to
our
do that.
behalves.
Yeah, and you know, the legislative staff is continuing to do that. And you know, I love the adjectives that all of the senators made, and even the governor, that you know, there's honest and productive talks. They're encouraged by the talks, and they're quite confident that they'll get this done early next week. So it is encouraging.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about advocacy, you've mentioned it, Ruth has mentioned it. Again, I think we have to acknowledge our members, we have to acknowledge our other associations, we have to acknowledge parents and families, as I think you and Ruth have both mentioned. You know, that's had a real impact on the governor of the administration. I think that's evident. And if you've heard the governor speak, he says that. I think we know it's genuine because he's saying these things and he's acting on it with these investments. And I want to acknowledge the Shapiro administration as well. I can't, in recent memory, certainly recall a governor and an administration in support of their own estimate or investment for the IDA community, going out there, visiting provider organizations, visiting with families, and supporting their own proposed investment in such a way that it's not just in writing in the budget somewhere and it's being left up to us. You know, I would say they're really leading the way in their social media, in their messaging, and it's making it easier for all of us to rally and to stay on message with, you know, it's easier to just say, keep the money in than it is for us to come up with, here's how much we're short, and calculate that and get people to agree and then sell legislators and people in leadership in the administration on that. And again, with Governor Shapiro taking a lead, putting the money in, it's really paved the way. And then beyond that, as active as they have been in their own advocacy, that's just something that I want to make sure we acknowledge. David, I'll let you comment there if you have thoughts.
No, and also I think what's really important is that you guys have been able to build bipartisan support for this, right? So, I mean, it is really not just a Democrat or Republican issue. This is a Pennsylvania issue. And I think the legislature sees that. And I think that's just, you know, kudos to everybody who really has called their legislators, has met with their legislators on both sides of the aisle. And it's been impactful. It really has. I mean, this is, you know, this is sort of an historic investment that we haven't seen in years in the IDA community. And it's something that the governor is really, you know, taking the bull by the horns and run with it. And he's really proud of it too.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on something you just said. You know, we say unified advocacy a lot. What does that really mean? One of the things it means is a strategy to really reach out to legislators. And, you know, early on, part of that strategy was making sure we reached out to Republican senators and, you know, kind of divvying up who's going to talk to whom and communicating who we're meeting with. And I can report we're up to 7 written letters of support from Republican senators to their leadership, to people like Senator Joe Pittman, expressing support for the governor's investment. And, you know, I think that's a monumental breakthrough. We talked about getting editorial boards to weigh in. We talk about Republican senators who obviously in a position of authority, having a majority to really be able to express that support in writing. You know, future initiatives, we know there's a long-term growth strategy, but we have to really continue this work and put the details around that. So that's a next effort. You know, we really have to make sure that that multi-year growth strategy does address there's 13,000 plus people on the waiting list, over 6,000 of them emergency. And again, the governor's administration have made a commitment to address that waiting list and to end the emergency waiting list. That's going to take capacity, sustainability, future investment, we're sure. So we have to remain together and expand our tent as much as we can. But we really do have someone who is behind us. So as we kind of wrap up this segment, David, can you take us into the walls? What's it really look like? You know, it sort of feels like it gets to a point where decision makers have to really, as this article suggests, you know, deliberate and get down to the real numbers. So who generally historically sort of is involved in that process? And we know there's still a lot of new players, and you know the governor's administration is still relatively new. So what can you tell us there?
Well, this is the governor's second budget, so he's a little bit more experienced this year. You know, they generally need to agree on, you know, the philosophy behind what this budget is, right? And the policies. Right now, they don't have a number that they agree upon. So that is where things are getting hung up, right? I think, you know we're going to get an increase in funding, and our goal is, and the hope is that we get the $483 million that the governor has proposed in his budget. they haven't been able to figure out what that number is exactly, and what that means to the overall budget. The governor had proposed we have a $14 billion surplus, and the governor has proposed an 8% increase in spending this year. So how they, come to an agreement on that number is yet to be seen. And that's really what they're working on right now. And that's what they'll continue to work on through the weekend and early next week. And ideally, we'll have a fiscal code, and we'll have an actual budget with numbers in it that they can all agree upon early next week.
Well, thanks again very much, David. I know you'll keep us informed of everything that's going on, and I'm sure it will be big news when there is a budget passed. And the last thing I will say here is just to once again remind everybody, it is not done. We do not see anything happen in terms of investment rate increases until this budget is passed. All the publications identify that directly. So we will wait. We will report that out. David, thank you for your efforts, and thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you. Take care.
You too as well. So I next want to go into performance-based contracting changes. So we announced yesterday some changes that we anticipate to be made official today. Rick Smith is joining us today. So as I welcome you in, Rick, I know that we spoke a couple of days ago. Yesterday, we put some things out that we had heard at a subcommittee of the Isaac meeting yesterday. Rick, you had indicated, stay tuned. I think a lot of this really was not secretive. I mean, these ongoing sessions with providers have been occurring up through June 20th. There was a poll taken. So some of the things we reported out on, Rick, I'll just kind of start there and let you comment and see if we've missed anything, or if there's any more shading you can give to any of this. But we know that there were a lot of concerns expressed through the public comments. Kristen yesterday acknowledged a lot of those, and then specifically got into some of the timeline changes, that there would be a second opportunity basically in the first cycle, rather than submit data July 1 for a January 1 tier assignment. It appears that ODP will open a window February 15th to March 15th of 2025 for a July 1 tier assignment, which would enable the use of 2024 calendar year data, which has been sort of a sticking point that many providers have expressed concern over the use of 2023 data, which in many cases would disqualify people from qualifying for a tier adjustment. So we understand the number of performance measures will change. So I think those are maybe the highlights. We captured it. There's a few other things that I'll comment on as we go through the discussion, but Rick, let me welcome you in and thank you for being here today. And we do have sort of what we wanted to cover. I'll briefly leave this up if you want to comment on the changes, and confirm what we had heard was it will be made official today through announcement. I checked just before we started the meeting. I hadn't seen that. And I'll also say that also communicated was it sounded as if the publication of waiver submissions and the change of documents as a result of public comments, that there would be notices published on July the 19th. Presumably that would be the actual application of the waiver, selective contracting waiver in support of performance-based contracting. Again, publication right now planned for July 19th. So hi, Rick, welcome. And anything I've missed?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, no, Patrick, it sounds like you're ahead of the announcement, but it sounds like you got most of what will be coming out today. Essentially, yes, that the delay will be till July 19th when everything will all the final performance measures, the final implementation approach, and the submission to CMS will be happening at that time.
Okay.
So yes, that announcement will be out this afternoon, I'm sure.
Okay. Very good. We've told everybody stay tuned. Here's what we think we know, and we know what was announced. We know that's consistent. We think a little bit with what providers have been saying, what Kristen and the rest of ODP have kind of been acknowledging, that what you're hearing. So that's good news, Rick. So I guess that I want to take a quick glance here to see if I've just missed talking about anything. I will say you've heard us talk here already, Rick, budget approval, we'll stay on that path. As we kind of get into this, I guess, open items, meaning there'll be a few things. I think I can just defer that as well, because I think it'll come out in some of the discussion of some of the budget numbers and some of the things we want to talk about. If you go to next slide, Craig, this really kind of frames, for members here today, when I reached out to Rick and asked him to join us today, this was kind of how I framed it. We kind of wanted to look at the status of the proposed fee schedule rates and public comments. We want to look at performance-based contracting fiscal policies and financial incentives, financial management guidance related to the waiver amendments, or things that affected the other waivers as well, to kind of align with performance-based contracting, and then any sort of ODP policy updates and announcements. So really the idea of bringing Rick in to join us today was sort of, let's frame things out. This was a couple of weeks ago when we first thought about doing this. So actually a lot's changed since then. So that's good news. We have some things that we definitely want to get into in a little more depth and detail. But maybe I know that what I have up on there is proposed fee schedule rates and public comments, the status of that. Do you mind addressing that now, Rick, in terms of, either you can address performance-based contracting feedback to the extent it affects financial policy or fee schedule rates? Did you get a large volume of comment, and is there anything that sort of people settled in on, and that you can share in terms of what you heard the most? And are they, I guess I didn't even look to see, are they published yet? I know you'll publish sort of a summary of comments and post that to the website, but anything that you can tell us thus far?
I think I can give some flavor, Patrick. They are not published yet, and they won't be published until we have a budget. So that's what we're waiting on. Also, before I jump into that, let me just correct one thing that I heard, because just so we're all messaging the same way.
Sure.
The growth strategy that was announced with the governor's budget, that is targeted at ending the emergency waiting list for adults. Okay, just we want to make sure that we're always saying the same thing on that, because that's really what that's about, and that's the initiative on additional capacity within the waivers, as well as the ability to manage capacity differently with the counties. I think that those both of those things are going to go a long way towards ending the emergency waiting list for adults. Okay.
Yeah, hey, Rick, since you bring that up, I mean, the numbers we see come from the PA waiting list campaign, and I know ODP parses those numbers down a little bit. So I think the last number that I recall seeing was like 6,016 people emergency per that source. For adults, then what would that be? Do you know the number there?
Yeah, it's obviously a moving target, but we're in the 4,000 range, so that's kind of what we're shooting at.
No, I appreciate the correction to use an accurate number. Still thousands of people that we have to find a way to serve in addition to maintaining services. And Rick, I am glad you brought up sort of the different way of management. Absolutely correct. That's been something that was touted when this budget was announced. The increase of waiver capacity. We understand those waivers have been granted. A lot of those people are now receiving services. What does the difference in management at the county AE level really look like to you? Can you sort of shed any light on that?
I can. Essentially, since we moved to payment through Treasury back in 2007, 2008, I believe, the counties, the funding for the waivers did not get transferred to the counties. It just essentially they were, managing authorizations, and in that context, they haven't always had a lot of skin in the game to manage within budget, even though, that rolls up and that's really ends up being my job. So as counties are ready, starting July 1st here, we are going to allow them, instead of managing to a number of slots in the waiver, we're going to, or positions, or I hate the term slots, but we're going to allow them to have a bit more flexibility to manage within the various waivers, such that, as long as they're staying within their overall budget, they can serve as many people as possible with the budgeted funds. So that's the intent. It's not a, nothing's going to really change July 1st. We're going to just assess how ready the individual counties are and how excited they are to do this. But that will allow them to serve more people on their waiting lists.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. And I don't believe you go back to that period of time. I was guessing it was 2009 where everything went to central payment through Treasury, and everybody billed Promise. And then several years later, residential went into fee schedule. But back in those days, the counties actually got the funds, correct? And my recollection is that became sort of a central authority issue for CMS, and that was sort of a driving force to bring that back to a state payment system. But the counties really had a lot of flexibility then because they controlled the purse, right? They could sort of allocate money. It doesn't feel like they'll have the same ability to do that. So I'm just trying to get into like how that works exactly. So they would be able to say, you know, there's a change here, changing authorization, not so much allocating money, but I guess they still will control authorization of services and have flexibility that way. And is that different than how it happens today? Like, is there a real difference in authority that they will have either budgetarily or the ability to authorize services any differently?
Yeah, actually, Steve Sorovic is saying it correctly in the chat there. Yes, essentially they'll have a virtual budget or a targeted budget number that they'll have ability to manage within the 3 waivers.
Okay, so and I'm sure there's going to be more detail and policy coming out once we get into an actually approved budget. And as you say, people have to sort of learn to do this differently. I'm sure there's some people who have never sort of dealt with managing that. But yeah, I understood. Appreciate you calling that out again. And I want to say for you and for members, we're not really trying to misrepresent the multi-year growth strategy. We're appreciative of that. We're appreciative of that messaging, that it's, because otherwise it sounds and feels like a one and done. And that's what we're trying to avoid in our advocacy and work together and support what the department and the administration are doing to really acknowledge this as lifelong services that have to be responsive. So we're fully supportive of that concept and how we can help shape the details of that as well. With the one of the things that I know I talked to you about, Rick, just even in asking you to join us today, was just fiscal policies and financial incentives. I see I have on the slide, but anything specific to performance-based contracting that you want to comment on? I don't want to gloss over that if there's things that you really want to call out. I know a lot of this is still being built, particularly pay for performance, but from fiscal management, fiscal policy, is there anything that you wanted to add there?
Yes, but I think we missed the first bullet too. So let me go back to the first bullet first and talk a little bit about the comments we've received on the proposed fee schedule rates. Okay. Yeah. So thank you. First of all, we have gotten a lot of comments. I want to say on the order of over 1,000, or in that ballpark. We have been through most of them, and I wanted to just give a flavor for what where we're going. There was a lot around the new proposed caps for the PFDS and the community living waiver, and whether or not people would be able to continue at the same level of services with the new caps. So that's an analysis we're doing. There's no intention that anyone would lose services as a result of the increased fee schedule rates. So getting through that analysis, and there may possibly be some adjustments to the caps, or we may determine that they're sufficient. The second major category where we got comments on is around the agency with choice wage ranges, and so I anticipate that we'll be making some adjustments there. The third thing I wanted to say is just I've stressed this over the years that this is really the mechanism for providers to comment on specific assumptions and specific data sources, things like that. And I think this round of comments is really the first and most extensive that I've seen that. So thank you. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of comments around health insurance numbers and around specific training hours for specific services. So that's all really valuable information for the rate setting process. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to delay this and go back and rework all the data for this time around. But those types of comments are really useful for future rate setting. So yes, so I think that's where we're at, Patrick. Like I said, we can't publish anything until we have a passed budget. And I think it's probably gonna, I hope your previous guess is correct that we have one next week.
Yep.
Because obviously, the longer this gets from July 1st, the more difficult it becomes for me and for you guys to get these rates retroactively effective to July 1st. So I imagine if it goes more than a week or two, we'll have to have some kind of announcement around how we're gonna implement effective July 1st. So.
Yeah, and I'll reinforce what you said, Rick. I didn't mean to imply that final rates will be published before there is an approved budget. I think we've been trying to message and make that clear. I did, however, think, and I don't know, maybe the timing is the same, but generally doesn't the department publish a summary of the comments received? Is that something that will also wait until the publication of rates?
We generally publish that when we publish in final, correct?
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, understood. And then you brought up one of the questions that I had. If this does, which of course likely is, July 1 is right around the corner, how do you intend or anticipate handling retroactivity in terms of getting people caught up if indeed the fee schedule is enacted as proposed?
I don't honestly know the answer to that question yet, Patrick, until we see how far out it's going to go. We've done our work, subject to any adjustments, but we've done our work to be able to implement new fee schedule rates in Promise effective and HCSIS effective July 1st. But if it goes too much further out, that we run into the issue of, providers billing, plans being in place, providers billing at the old rates, and then those have to be voided to get the new rates in. And so it gets a lot messier the further out it gets. But I don't have an answer at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll stay tuned. Obviously, we like to see simple as possible, and I think you do too. So understood. And again, most importantly, things get approved and that they are indeed effective July 1st. So I'll just call that out now as part of the advocacy. I mean, we do need it as a July 1, and I'm not putting that on you, Rick. I think that when we talk about in terms of potential cuts to the budget, we don't want to see our budget get cut because I'm sure that has implications for how you implement policies. So the delay is not good, meaning that any reduction to proposed funding is likewise not good. And you mentioned caps, Rick. So I think my takeaway is the department generally does what it needs to do to prevent people from losing services. So when you say you're looking at it, if it's an issue, you'll address it. If it's not an issue, it doesn't need to be addressed. Is that a fair takeaway from what you're telling us?
Yeah, that is a fair takeaway. I mean, obviously, just on the surface, if you see some of the caps increased at roughly 12%, some of the rates have increased more than 12%. So to the extent someone has, up to the cap of that service that has increased by more than 12%, obviously that could be an issue. Those types of circumstances are very few and far between. So the analysis I'm doing now is just to assess what's that impact.
Okay, sounds good. And then Craig, I'll ask you, and Rick, I know you're good at keeping up with chat and questions as well. Feel free to jump in with anything that you see, and Craig will help us out if there's anything that's on point of what we're talking about to kind of jump in with questions. And as we do that, Rick, I will sort of say, I'll kind of revisit a conversation you and I had from a couple of days ago. And I mentioned, and some of the members on the call today may have joined our June 14th performance-based contracting workshop, what to know, how to succeed. And I really didn't get the chance to get into some of the budget numbers at a high level. And then I think that leads to some implications about performance-based contracting. So I'll let everyone know I shared that presentation deck with Rick. I talked about some of the numbers, both from the proposed budget, some of the details in the blue book, and then it gets down into some of the things that Rick and I did chat about in preparation for talking here at the membership meeting today. So if you go to next slide, Craig, and then Craig, I'll just ask you, is there anything out there that we need to address before we get into this?
I think there was just a question in the Q&A that the governor said 1,600 people were going to be added to this current budget, and the question was, did that happen? Will that happen?
The capacity that was announced in this current fiscal year, yes, it was released, and for the most part, people have been enrolled.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Rick. I'm pretty sure that Kristen announced that at the most recent Isaac. I think that question came up, and that yes, um, the waiver capacity was increased, and that people have in fact been enrolled for that capacity. I think the follow-up question was also, are people receiving those services? Because that's a question we have on capacity. So I believe there's also an indication that many of those people are receiving services. I'm not clear on what that is, and I'm not trying to characterize it one way or the other. Would you say so as well, Rick? Most people are getting some form of service. It's actually being billed.
Yes, exactly. We are seeing the increased billing associated with that capacity. Mhm.
Okay. And do you expect that, does that have any bearing on waiting list numbers? Because we're not seeing it yet. I know sometimes there's a lag in that. How does the process sort of work where those folks who may have otherwise been on the waiting list as intended are now receiving services? Are you tracking that internally to kind of look at what that looks like, or not quite yet?
We are, Patrick. I mean, that does certainly make an impact on the waiting list, and depending on how folks are prioritized for services. So yes, we're tracking that. We can always get better. We have some timing delays around updating puns and things like that, but that's certainly one as part of the growth strategy that we'll be paying a lot of attention to.
Okay, thank you, Rick. So Rick, this is something, this may be very familiar to you. So these are sort of the detailed numbers from the budget, the 24-25 column on the far right. And you're kind of just going back to a true actual year, sort of how we close out 23-24, and then the current proposed budget. So, I guess I would sort of start out by saying these are all real numbers to the extent we know them. I had used this slide when we met with our members a couple of weeks ago and really didn't get a chance to get into it. And since I didn't, better to have you here to sort of guide, correct, and provide clarification. So right now, what we are advocating for is that number on the top right, the $2.645 billion. Roughly then that gets matched by the federal government at about 54% roughly. And then the total amount, as you see at the top, Intellectual Disabilities Community Waiver Program, that's a total budget then, Rick, of $5.7 billion roughly, state and federal, and that number is far right column, bottom, 55701. And Rick, we had this conversation because it was a little unclear to me. So I was asking you about county administration, how's that funded? And I believe you told me that's from base, that doesn't come out of this allocation. So am I recalling correctly that that is a number that should be available to fund services and claims, services through claims, the 5.7 billion?
That's correct. This would be for the 3 ID waivers. That would be 5.7 billion for the 3 ID waivers. Correct. And
Okay.
there's a separate base appropriation where base services are funded. There's a separate autism appropriation. There's a separate state centers appropriation, and there's a separate private ICF appropriation.
Okay. And then fair to say we've missed that a couple of years, right? That's been the reason for the clawback. So when we heard about, David mentioned this if you weren't on the meeting yet, last year's budget, we were asking for more. We actually got a cut. I think there's people who look at that as just being technical, but it's really not technical. It was $170 million approximately. And then this is a full page in the blue book, but I captured the footnote. So it looked like in addition to that $170 million, another $32.487 million state funds only actually was also reduced. So, and that's where you get sort of the middle column number state funds. So when the budget came out this year, available was this $2.29 billion state fund number. So overall, then about $200,000 that at least that much wasn't spent because it was sort of removed from the line item. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that I think that's a fair statement, Patrick. And I think, this really goes to the point I was making earlier, which is, we want to serve as many people and we want to spend as close to our budget as we can. That's part of the growth strategy, and that's part of the reason that these clawbacks happen, because during the pandemic there was, people couldn't get services. You guys all know the story, but if we don't spend the money, they look at it and say, like they don't need this money because they're not spending it.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think if you look at the actual, I'm just sort of starting with a general conclusion that we've been pretty underspent, understandably. Pandemic, inflation, workforce capacity. I think individual members, and there's been surveys and data collected on this. But even the 4.9 billion, if you look at the very beginning column, there's probably a lot of one-time money in there, Rick. Is that true? I mean, ARPA money was being released. There's initiative money. Does that capture all of that spending? So when we say, 4.9 billion, big numbers, to 5.7, that's a pretty big jump. But even in that 4.9, there wasn't $4.9 billion in total claims, was there, in that year? That's probably initiative money on top of that.
That would include one-time payments, correct? Yes, Patrick.
Okay. And then a lot of that's ARPA, right? So if you kind of look in that same column, the match looks, the federal funds total is really big, 1.87 billion state and 3 billion plus federal. So that's because the feds were putting more money in, correct, to match us.
Yep, that's correct. Mhm.
Okay. All right. I don't want to get too into the weeds on this. It's important for me to understand and sort of understand the implications, because investment, and I guess I would just say the 200 million we lost, as we talk about rates, I think an argument we make is, the rates are insufficient sometimes to draw the money down. So, we'll try to deliver that message. And while you still have conversations internally, and presumably you talk to Mercer Consulting, which is who you use, we know that anything that can be tweaked, rightly or wrongly, I like to make the argument, I think there's plenty of money there to tweak things and still increase the rates, because part of the problem of the last 2 years, at least, seems to be there's just not enough in the rates to expend this line item money out of the budget, and we end up with these surpluses. So you said it already, Rick. You like to spend the allocation, and we do too, because that's money that gets out to providers to pay staff and serve people. So I'll just say that we're in agreement there, and that's why I like looking at the numbers, and I appreciate the transparency. Do we have, Rick, anything you want to, I'll give you the last word on this, and Craig, if there's any questions.
No, I don't know that I have a last word. I think I think I might not disagree. I mean, I might disagree with your last statement there, as far as there's money to tweak the rates further. I think this the 5.7 is a buildup of the proposed rates. So to the extent we do any tweaking, it'll be some up and some down to stay within that 5.7. So.
Okay, I'll let you disagree. I said you'd have the last word, so I won't steal it back from you. Craig, we can go to the next slide. I guess then kind of break this down into like what's real about today. This is a slide I shared a couple of weeks ago. Again, didn't get into it a whole lot, but Rick, I did talk to you about it a couple of days ago, and I just kind of used it to frame out that when you look at the details of the budget, rate increases is a term used that really is all inclusive of performance-based contracting, which is further inclusive of pay for performance. So I just kind of use these. They're from different publications, by the way. So the bracketed terms, fee schedule rates and selective contracting, they don't come from the same document, but taken together, we've been saying from the governor's messaging and from the budget itself, $483 million going into rates. This comes out to be, per the publications, $477.4 million. And some of this doesn't include the autism waiver. So if you look at that, my recollection is it's roughly about another $5 billion, or $5 million. So when you bundle this all together, it comes out to the advocacy number. But I just wanted to point out that really is, that's the total package. So when people hear rates is not 483, and then we don't need to ask you, well, how much more is going in for performance-based contracting? It's already in the number, correct?
Yes, I would agree with the way you have this characterized. Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know I didn't sort of grab everything from the publications. I'm just going to take a quick glance here for the fiscal impact on selective contracting implementation. This is year one. So as proposed, we know we're talking about changes. But roughly as proposed, and as all the documents indicate, we're talking about a half year of performance-based contracting, so a January 1 implementation date. And if you look at the state funds here, $22.455 million in state funds, that's the bottom line. And what I have highlighted is $50 million. And what I didn't put on here is, as the publications in the PA Bulletin always indicate, they do the out years, and they project what's next year going to cost, and then the next 4 or 5 years thereafter. So this is a half of year at 50. I believe it's pretty on point. It's 100 million then every year thereafter. Is that correct, Rick? Would you say?
Yeah, that is correct, Patrick. And I think one of the things that maybe is not so evident in these numbers is that you know, and we've said it many times, but just it's how these numbers get built up. You know, there is nothing wrong with being a primary provider. If in fact we expect over half of our providers are going to continue to be primary providers operating off the fee schedule and having access to pay for performance, et cetera. That would then imply that, you know, less than half of our providers will be select and clinically enhanced. And I think, you know, if you could, which is certainly the exercise I go through, you could back into that 50 million for a half year or 100 million for the whole year by looking at the residential spend. Then you would know roughly how many providers and individuals we expect to be served in the select and clinically enhanced tiers. So I just wanted to make that point. Nothing at all wrong with being a primary provider. We fully expect over half of our providers will be primary providers.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. And I mean, I think that's sort of the reason I want to point it out, because I'll start with the first part of what you just answered and talked about. So the numbers really don't bear out. You know, we looked at the broad numbers, $5.7 billion in claims, and $100 million would be funding residential providers at a 5% or an 8% increase. So to your point, and I think we had this conversation, if you do the numbers on it, it'd be more like 25%. If you just take those dollars, and there's nothing in the budget that changes that. Again, we've already talked about multi-year growth strategy. We'll certainly do our part to communicate and advocate where we think further investment is needed. But as written now, I want to make it clear and stay factual that performance-based contracting is not a situation where eventually you're just going to work hard enough and everybody's going to get a 5% or an 8% bump. So I kind of want to start there. And I probably want to even take your other statement a bit further, that there really could and should be premier providers in every tier, because it takes investment to get into these other areas. Some organizations have already decided what they are and know we serve complex folks. We have a broad array of services and do a lot of behavioral health. So I like to start with the reality that not everybody is going to get there. There just isn't enough money to do that. And it may not be where you want or need to be. So I just encourage everybody to look at it strategically. Until you can meet all the standards, we, as of right now, don't know exactly how many that will be, but you could invest a lot of time and energy to receive nothing in return. So I think that's not a today conversation, but I will say that's sort of the theme of our workshops, performance-based contracting, what to know and how to succeed. You know, I think we begin with the what to know comes from you, Rick, and ODP. Like, we need to know what to know and how to implement and how to comply. But how to succeed is really an organizational decision and a strategy. And that's where we want to encourage and help members, because we want you to understand the reality is 100% of providers are not going to get a 5 and 8% increase. And there are plenty of means of succeeding in that environment. There's the diversity of your service mix, and there's different services. You have to really get at looking at where exactly you're making and losing money. So this is happening really rapidly. We're glad for a little bit of relief, but I think everybody needs to work at their own pace to be successful. So again, I'll backtrack, Rick. I appreciate the framing of it. And do you disagree with the 25% I'm talking about? I even think that might be generous when you look at $100 million. I know we're not talking about the res budget here when we talk about 5.7 billion, but it's a significant part of the spend, right? Residential is the most costly service.
Yeah, exactly. It's about half of our spend. Correct.
Okay. So you can see
and the 25%, I mean, it depends on how you characterize things, Patrick. I mean, I would expect we would see between 25 and 40% of our providers / individuals served in residential in a select or clinically enhanced tier. But you know, it depends how you slice things.
Yeah, and it reminds me of one clarification that you made for me, Rick. You know, I've been, I think, incorrectly saying, well, this is enterprise-wide, but really it's residential. So you get the bump on your residential billing, of course, you don't get it for other services. But even with that, that means that there will be providers getting the 5 and the 8% bump to serve people who are classified needs group 1, 2, and 3 as well. So that's probably also a little bit more dilution of the $100 million. Would you agree?
I'm not sure that I would say that that's dilution specific to the $100 million. I mean, if you qualified for a select or clinically enhanced tier, you're serving the whole spectrum of folks in needs groups or needs levels. It's not, that's not part of the equation, if you
Understood.
will.
But I guess I'm making the point, yeah, that's directed at trying to serve the most complex people. And I'm not discouraging anybody from looking at the mix. It kind of is what it is. These are people's homes when you're talking residential. But obviously a larger organization that meets the criteria in performance-based contracting, meets the right ratios. But some of that $100 million has to go, of course, to support all their residential services, not just the services. And don't get me wrong, I think that's a good thing in that regard. But nevertheless, when we're talking about a finite amount of money, at some point that $100 million does get allocated by you. Okay, Craig, anything we need to address or any questions?
I don't see anything in the chat or the Q&A, so nope.
Okay, so Rick, we'll move on here, and I want to be mindful, respectful of your time that you agreed to give us today. So I want to leave you some time to answer any questions or make any final comments too. So as we go on, Craig, to comment letter, we did talk about this already, and Craig, I don't know if we kind of set it up as a handout. We don't need to do that. If you can just go to next slide, Craig. I'm going to briefly just talk about the content of our letter and what we tried to spell out. And I'm going to not spend a lot of time on this, Rick. I want to leave some time for you to sort of interact and hear from members and answer questions. But these are all kind of self-explanatory. We forever sort of talked about making sure, because DSPs provide not all services, of course, but most services that really involve daily care of any sort, any support in the community, DSPs provide that. So we like to see DSPs equitably be treated across those services. Inflation is something that's been kind of driving force behind everything. I'll skip over overtime because I want to comment on that a little bit. But the admin, unlike what you talked about with health insurance and other things that are in the assumptions where you can kind of look at it and agree or disagree, we've always taken issue with the admin just being a factor that doesn't get into what's it really cost to have liability insurance and run your back office in today's environment and economy. So we've called that out again. And obviously, we stay very committed to advancing some form of a cost of living adjustment. And we'll pivot to our market index bills when the time is appropriate to do that. And I don't like to forget about the IDA augmentation account. And I've been reminded there's probably the need for some legislative action. David Caligiuri had a conversation with us yesterday that's probably an area that we need to make sure that the savings from the state centers does continue to stay in the community ID system. So, all of those things are in the letter. Glad to hear you got a lot of comments and responses, Rick. So with the overtime, I think our experience with that has been, we've always argued that it is lower than actual in the assumptions. And I think, we talked about this. I've said I've taken it literally, so I've commented on it on behalf of TPA from what I've heard from members as that residential does not have overtime included in the rate assumptions. And the reason being for that the federal standard, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the overtime exemption over a particular number, 35,000 and change right now, that ODP, Mercer have sort of communicated a position that over and above that number, DSPs are exempt from overtime. We, of course, take a strong position that that's not the case. And that's borne out by the fact that agencies do indeed pay overtime. And we have data collected that indicated in our last survey that 16% of wages were paid at an overtime rate. So I know that's something that you've already said publicly you're looking into. This came up at Isaac. We talked about it the other day. So I guess I'll stop there and just let you react to that, because obviously where we want to go with it, and I've already said that, making some movement in rates, we disagree. I would say that history suggests that there's some money there. One-time payments sometimes get used to absorb money that isn't spent in claims. But on the issue of the overtime itself and ODP's exact interpretation of Fair Labor Standards Act, can you shed some light on that for me?
No, Patrick, I can't. I other than to say that and I'm sorry, I didn't when I was talking about the things we were reviewing in the rates, that is one of the things we're taking back and seeing what the implications are for the higher higher thresholds with Mercer and internally. It is something that we're looking at, Patrick. I don't have an answer for you at the moment.
Okay, well, we'll stay in touch, Rick. So it's a big issue, and obviously we feel, to the point you've raised, tell us what's wrong, tell us why it's wrong, and tell us what the fix is. I think we've tried to do that in terms of spelling out, and also left open if we're wrong and you have an interpretation that you obviously believe is valid, we need to hear and know that. So we just appreciate the dialogue. We'll continue to stay on this issue. We of course think it has big implications for final rates. So we certainly want to have this conversation sooner than later. And we hope that's part of your process between now and whenever budget is approved and rates go published as final, that there will be some attention on this issue. So I'll leave it at that, Rick. Okay, Rick, is there anything further that you were expecting to talk about or want to talk about? We'll just go into our discussion section next. Craig, if you can go next slide, we'll give Rick a couple of moments here.
If I can just briefly, Patrick, mention the supplemental payments, because I know I've gotten some questions about those. This was 6% of the 6-month revenue. Those have all gone out, or they've been processed, let me say. The first 650 or so providers should have seen them on their remittance advice on June 17th, and they probably saw funding this week, depending if they're getting EFT or not. So I've gotten a lot of questions about them because they might have showed up at a service location you weren't expecting. But as with any one-time payments, we always my team goes back and looks for any outstanding receivable balance and clears those receivable balances before they issue the one-time funding. So if you haven't seen them, if you have questions, please feel free to drop me a note. The remaining roughly 100, those providers will see them on the July 1st RA remittance advice. And the providers that would be in that group are providers who had not submitted their financial statements. We had followed up with a number of them to get those required financial statements in, and also the agency with choice providers that I had contacted individually to just work through the numbers. So as of July 1st, everybody that requested the payment should be able to see the payments.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I neglected to bring that up and ask you about it, so I appreciate you backtracking on it. And it does remind me also that about, I think you indicated when we chatted earlier, the state would be seeking an extension to ARPA approval. Is that correct, or would there be implications for that you can share with us?
That is correct that we requested. I don't have any further news on what the implications of that will be if and when CMS approves the extension, but just have to hang tight for that.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about our upcoming conference next month. Rick, are you planning on being with us next month? Do you know yet? July 26th? I know Kristen and you guys have been very generous with your time in past years to come out to join our in-person conference. So I hope you can join us then.
Yes, we are planning. It's on our calendar. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's great, Rick. And I want to say I think I'm aware that at some point in the future, you will be moving on to your next chapters, and you come out and see us every February, March, depending upon when the budget is released. I'm glad we'll see you next month. I look forward to it. But in case you're not around next year when we're doing this process, I just want to take a moment and thank you for always being gracious with your time, always being here. I know we don't always agree, but in order to disagree, you have to be present and engage with us. And that's something that I very much appreciate. So I just want to take the time to, very early, hopefully wish you the best. And thank you for being a friend and resource for TPA.
I fully agree. The conversation is good.
Okay, thanks very much, Rick. Have a great day. We'll see you soon. Okay, and yeah, please hang around for our remaining moments. I just want to take a quick second. You've heard me talk about the conference. It is coming up July 26th. I will say I'm really pleased. We've had a great turnout of people registering. We've actually had to circle back to the RLA to see what capacity is. We've had many exhibitors, sponsors step up. I want to briefly mention we have our platinum sponsor is Committed Pathways of Southwestern Pennsylvania. We have several gold sponsors, Envision Human Services, K&L Gates, silver sponsors, Mainstay Life Services, On Target by Abound Health, Therap, MedMinder, Simply Home. We have a number of exhibitors, Service Coordination Unlimited, PDC Pharmacy, Achieva Family Trust, Horizon Information Systems, Wellbridge Health. We expect Safe and Home will be joining us. We got word early this morning that Station MD plans to be participating. The BI Collaborative plans to be participating on some level, at least exhibiting with us. And we have several other people that are still waiting to give us final decisions on whether they will be here. And also, we're well beyond, we may be about three-quarters of the way of having the tickets be claimed. So we look forward to a great event. Kristen, as you heard me say already, will be here. Rick will be here. Oftentimes the leadership team, Dr. Chirpus, Jeremy Yale, Lauren House in the past, Michelle O'Toole from the regional office in the Western region. Many other ADP staff have participated. We also have Joe Macbeth joining us, the CEO of the National Alliance of Direct Support Professionals. Donna Martin, Vice President of Strategy for Anchor, will be joining us. We have a few other people that will be assembling to be speakers and panelists. So we hope you can join us. I just wanted to take a moment to thank and acknowledge those of you that have already participated, registered. We're looking forward to a great day, July 26th, about 4 weeks from now. And with that remaining moments we have, Craig, I want to turn it over to you because we did promise some time on some other updates that we don't have a lot of time for, but we won't hold anybody over, but I'll turn it over to you, Craig.
Thanks, Patrick. So I just wanted to do a super quick overview of our website for those of you who haven't visited it yet, just to see what the experience will look like when you log in. Again, we push logins out to everybody, so you should get an email. It will look a little weird. We had originally anticipated that it would come from the provideralliance.org, our information accounts, but it was coming from our website host, Viath. So if anybody needs their login, please reach out to me through information@provideralliance.org. We can certainly regenerate those and send those to you. When you come to the website and you just click on the login page, when you log in, you just put a password in. You'll get a temporary one for the first time, and then you can change the password once you log in. So I'm just going to log in really fast here. And this is going to be our landing page. So there's a lot of great features in here for members now that we just want to go over a couple of highlights for you. You'll see information about your login. This is where you'll update your password. You'll see that'll be marked in red for the first login. You'll see our job board. If anybody has a position they'd like to post to share with the TPA community, if you click on this coming soon, it gives you instructions on how to email us so that we can post that job, that job for you. You'll see a promotion for our conference and then any upcoming events. And then across the top, you'll see some of the navigation features. So Patrick mentioned we had the June 26th media event. If you click the photo album here, you can go in and see we've uploaded the photos for the June 26th event. You can just scroll through them just as you were on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. So I encourage you to check out those photos. Couple of other things just very quickly to share with you. Under the engagement tab, you will see that we created a whole series of forums that are available for all members to sign up for. So this is what would have traditionally been our committee structure. It's super easy to sign up for those. So if you go in here and click sign up, you can just mark that you would like to sign up. You don't even have to put any comments, and you'll be signed up for the forum. Once you go into the forum, you'll be able to enter the forum here. And it'll let you opt out. So if you get in and this isn't something you're super into, you can certainly opt out of that forum at any moment. You can send emails to any of the members in the forum. So it's a great way to begin to communicate and create community among those common topic areas. So again, encourage everybody to come in, check out the forums, check out the main web page. The experience, we tried to replicate the experience as much as we could on the mobile app. It's a little bit different just because we're not sort of experts in mobile app development, but it does give you a lot of the features that you see on the website available on the mobile app. So again, encourage everybody. It is available on Android and on Apple for both of those devices. So you can certainly download the mobile app. It'll be helpful when we get to the closer to the conference. It's a place where we'll be able to push updates and notifications to people for happenings with the conference. So with that, well, there's just a couple minutes left. I'll turn it back over to Patrick. If there's anybody, certainly if you have questions, just shoot us an email at information@provideralliance.org. We'll help get you oriented to where you need to be in the website. And again, encourage everybody to go out and check it out.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. And I know we've had questions, job postings and how to communicate with members. And recently a member reached out to us about a home that they may be interested in putting on the market. So Craig and I will follow up. We'll get back to you if you've asked us a direct question, but this is great that we're able to offer this to you to communicate directly to members. There's a lot of resources out there, of course, in our membership, and a lot of you have answers to questions that we don't always know the answer to. So with that, we can go to next slide, Craig. And I just want to thank, you were on a demo. We'll thank everybody, wish everybody a happy 4th of July. Please have a safe, happy, and healthy holiday. We really appreciate you joining us. We'll keep you informed on everything on budget. Have a great weekend and week next week, everyone, and we will see you next time. Thank you.